Is your Linux system carrying a kernel update you should install this week? And could the most interesting distro news actually change how an experimental operating system upgrades itself? In this roundup, we will separate the urgent patches from the genuinely useful changes, then finish with a KDE Linux update that may matter more than its quiet release notes suggest. First, Debian. The new security advisory is not exciting in the usual sense, but that is exactly why people skip it. A long list of kernel fixes can feel like background noise until one of those flaws turns into an escalation path, a service outage, or an information leak on a machine you expect it to be boring and dependable. Debian Security Advisory DSR 6405-1 was issued on July 31st for the stable Trixie release. The payoff is simple. Debian has fixed the affected kernel issues in version 6.12.100-1 and recommends upgrading the Linux packages. If this is a desktop or a fleet you manage, apply your normal update process, then reboot into the new kernel. That does not mean every Debian user needs to panic. The advisory does not say every vulnerability is remotely reachable in every configuration. It does mean postponing a normal kernel update is harder to justify this week. Keep your own change controls, test where you need to test, but do not confuse routine with optional. There is a second part to the kernel story, and it explains why version numbers alone can mislead people. We will come back to what this means for distros that track new kernels aggressively. But first, the stable 7.1 branch itself moved again, and the release note is deliberately brief for a reason. A point release, like Linux 7.1.6, does not normally come with a flashy desktop feature that can make it easy to ignore. The risk is assuming a stable point release is only a cosmetic version change, when its job is to collect fixes for the people already running that branch. That is the value proposition. Less drama, more corrected code. On August 3rd, Greg Kroer-Hartman announced Linux 7.1.6 and stated that all users of the 7.1 kernel series must upgrade. If your distribution offers this kernel through its normal repositories, use the distribution's update path. If you manually track the stable series, move to 7.1.6 rather than treating 7.1.5 as the end of the story. For most desktop users, the decision tree is refreshingly unglamorous. On Debian Trixie, make sure you reach version 6.12.100-1 or the current security fixed package supplied after it. On a distro shipping 7.1, take its normal stable update, and if your kernel is tied to certified hardware or a production workload, schedule the reboot instead of quietly deferring it forever. Now for some more experimental story. AerynOS has released its 2026.08 ISO, but the kernel version is not the most interesting part. The real question is whether a distribution can reshape its repository and package management foundations without forcing its users into a painful manual migration. If that goes badly, an ambitious update mechanism becomes a support nightmare. AerynOS says it has landed versioned repositories phase 2. That work adds new on-disk repository layout and a new MOS KDL configuration format designed to let MOS upgrade itself across otherwise breaking format changes. In plain English, the project is trying to make deep plumbing changes arrive through an ordinary update workflow instead of a one-off reinstall. That idea becomes more useful when you look at the rest of the release. The project has added experimental OpenZFS support for user-managed data drives and native reflink support in MOS for XFS. These are not reasons to reinstall your working machine tomorrow. They are signals that AerynOS is concentrating on the unglamorous foundations that determine whether an operating system can evolve safely. But here is the part that matters. Before you treat 2026.08 like a mainstream desktop release, AerynOS itself asks early adopters to test OpenZFS and provide feedback. It also carries a meaningful systemed packaging change, and that change could surprise anyone who relies on old, hard-coded network interface names after the next reboot. So, is AerynOS ready to become your daily driver? For a curious tester who understands the trade-offs, it is a compelling project to watch. For a production workstation, treat it as an alpha stage experiment with promising infrastructure, not a drop-in replacement for a conservative distribution. That is not a criticism, it is the honest reading of the release notes. The ISO also includes a modern stack. Kernel 7.1.5 for stable and gaming branches, 6.18.40 for long-term support, plus components such as Cosmic 1.5, KDE Plasma 6.7.3, System 2 61.2, Mesa 26.1.6, and NVIDIA driver 610.43.03 in the repositories. That is a lot of current software, which is precisely why the project's careful testing message should be taken seriously. The final story is quieter, but it gets at something desktop Linux projects often underestimate: quality quality assurance that tests a whole operating system, not just individual packages. A system can look healthy in isolated tests, while a graphics stack change breaks login, or while a session change quietly stops your password wallet from unlocking when you need it. KDE Linux says its new next-generation QA system now acts as a full-stack integration test suite. The project reports that it already identified a login-breaking KDE crash from a GCC regression in Arch Linux and a regression in automatically unlocking the wallet at login. Both were fixed before they could become somebody else's bad morning. There is also an encouraging user-facing detail. KDE Linux's package compatibility helper can, with consent, download compatible software from FlatHub when a file has no handler. The July work adds support for Java applications and DOS apps through a JRE or DOSBox. It is a modest feature, but it addresses the practical question people ask when a new Linux system meets an old file. KDE Linux is not presenting itself as finished. The project says it is 83% of the way to its beta milestone, and it still documents complex disk setups as a manual exercise because the installer does not yet formally support them. That combination of forward progress and plainly stated limits is exactly what you want from a project that wants technical users to test it honestly. Here is the practical takeaway. Debian Trixie users should take the security fix kernel update and reboot. Anyone tracking Linux 7.1 should move to 7.1.6 through the supported path. AerynOS is worth watching for its upgrade architecture, but testing belongs on hardware where you accept change. And KDE Linux is quietly becoming more credible because it is investing in tests that catch real desktop failures. If this roundup helped you decide what to update, like the video, subscribe to Tondos Linux and sign up at tondoslinux.com/subscribe.